I want you to picture something. You're standing inside your living room, right? Major hurricane is hitting.
Oh, terrifying.
Yeah, the wind is howling outside, debris is just flying everywhere, but, you feel relatively safe because your house was built to code.
Right, you've got the concrete block.
Exactly. Then, just a single piece of flying debris, like maybe a neighbor's runaway lawn chair, smashes right through your living room window. In an instant, that high-velocity wind rushes through the broken glass directly into your house.
And that's when the physics completely turn against you.
Right. Your home suddenly inflates like a balloon. The internal air pressure builds up so rapidly, just violently pushing against the ceiling, that the absolute weakest point of the structure gives way. And just like that, your entire roof pops completely off the house.
Exposing you and your family to the open sky.
Yeah, and the torrential rain. And the crazy thing is, that catastrophic structural failure didn't happen because the wind hit the roof from the outside. It happened because of the internal pressure from one single broken window.
It's incredible how fast it happens, too.
You sent us this really fascinating stack of research papers, meteorological deep dives, and disaster management protocols. You wanted to know if you are actually prepared for the reality of hurricane season? Well, today is June 1st, and as you know, that marks the official beginning of the season.
It is the day that always arrives exactly on schedule, yet somehow always seems to catch millions of people completely off guard.
Every single year.
Every year. And looking through the materials you gathered for us to analyze, the recurring theme isn't a lack of caring. It's really a fundamental misunderstanding of what modern hurricane preparedness actually requires.
Welcome to Meteorology Matters, the podcast that dives deep into the science, chaos, and stories behind the weather that shapes our world. This show was created by meteorologist Rob Jones.
And our mission for this deep dive today is to basically take that old, tired, cliche hurricane grocery list and just completely tear it up.
Oh, please do. You know the one buying bottled water and bread like 24 hours before landfall?
Exactly. We're getting way beyond that. Instead, we're diving deep into the actual physics of home hardening, the evacuation supplies you really didn't know you needed, and the absolute nightmare that is insurance documentation if you haven't, prepped your paperwork.
Plus the underlying psychology of why human beings just constantly wait until it's way too late. We're customizing this entirely for you to ensure you never have to scramble when the skies turn dark.
Because the goal of analyzing your sources isn't just to help you survive a storm. I mean, survival is the absolute bare minimum.
Right.
The real goal is resilience. It's the ability to bounce back, to return to your life, your job, your routine as quickly as possible after the weather clears.
Without being financially or emotionally ruined, right? I always think of this like wearing a seatbelt. You don't try to wrestle your seatbelt on while the car is actively hydroplaning toward a concrete barrier.
No, you'd be way too late.
You put it on in the driveway while the car is in park and the weather is beautiful. Putting the work in now, based on this research you've shared, prevents the panic later. Because honestly, preparedness is not panic. Preparedness actually reduces stress.
Oh, absolutely. It improves safety and protects property so you can recover quickly. But before we get into the physical supplies or the engineering stuff, let's start with the human brain.
Okay, let's do it.
Because one of the psychological studies in your stack addresses this concept of the psychology of delay. Why do people, year after year, wait until a storm is an imminent threat before taking action?
I mean, I see it every season, but what does the science say?
It really comes down to a specific, deeply ingrained cognitive bias called optimism bias.
Optimism bias.
Yeah. The human brain is actually wired to assume that negative events are just less likely to happen to us personally than to other people.
Oh, sure. It won't happen to me.
Right. So when we see a storm developing in the distance, say, a tropical depression spinning up in the Gulf of Mexico, our brain instinctively rationalizes the threat away.
We tell ourselves, maybe the steering currents will push it somewhere else.
Exactly. Or we think, oh, the wind shear will tear it apart before it reaches our coastline.
Mm-hmm.
And that optimism bias is a great survival mechanism for everyday stress.
But in meteorology?
In meteorology, it is a deadly trap. By relying on real-time National Hurricane Center updates to trigger your physical preparation, you're stepping into a logistical nightmare.
Well, let me push back on that a bit, though, because if NOAA is providing world-class real-time data from the Hurricane Center, why wouldn't I use that data to make my decisions? Shouldn't I wait to see if the storm is actually going to hit my city before I drop thousands of dollars on a generator or spend my whole weekend boarding up the house?
It's a fair question, but it fundamentally ignores how physical supply chains actually operate.
Okay, how so?
Let's look at the logistics of getting a standby generator. The manufacturing and distribution of heavy equipment like that operates on a just-in-time inventory model.
Meaning they don't have a warehouse full of them sitting around?
Precisely. Retailers keep a few on hand to minimize overhead costs. When a storm officially becomes a threat, the demand for those goods skyrockets by literally thousands of percent in a matter of hours.
Wow. Thousands of percent.
Yeah. So if you wait until mid-August, when a tropical wave is actively strengthening, you're competing with tens of thousands of other people for the exact same 5 generators at your local hardware store.
And even if you miraculously secure one of those generators, it's not like you can just plug a massive standby unit into your wall.
Right. You need certified electricians, plumbers, to wire it to your electrical panel, plumb it to the natural gas line. They have to pull municipal permits.
And I'm guessing when a storm is approaching, those installers are basically impossible to book.
They're booked solid for months, and municipal offices begin shutting down anyway, so the timeline compresses. Panic buying completely replaces strategic, methodical planning. You end up buying the wrong equipment, or worse, you buy nothing at all.
That makes perfect sense. The supply chain just cannot handle an entire city deciding to prepare on the exact same Tuesday.
It really can't.
But your research points out that a massive part of this delay comes down to a public misunderstanding of the graphics meteorologists use. Specifically, the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone. You hear it on the news all the time. People call it the cone of impact.
Which is perhaps the most dangerous misnomer in modern weather forecasting. Inside the meteorological community, it is famously known as the cone of confusion.
The cone of confusion. I like that. I mean, I hate it, but it's accurate.
It really is vital that we break down what that cone actually represents mathematically, because it dictates so much human behavior. The cone does not represent where the storm is going to cause damage.
Wait, really? What does it represent then?
The cone only represents the 5-year average historical error for predicting the center of the storm.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping the math here. You're saying the cone isn't a prediction of the storm's size, but merely a margin of error for where the eye of the storm will track.
That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The National Hurricane Center looks back at their forecasts over the previous 5 years to determine how far off their predictions were on average.
Like at day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on.
Right. And then they draw a circle around each forecast point based on that historical error and connect the circles to make the cone. Statistically, it means that the exact center of the storm's circulation will remain somewhere within that white cone about 67% of the time.
Okay, but if it's 67% of the time, that means 1 out of every 3 storms will see its center wander completely outside of the cone.
Yes, exactly.
That seems like a massive margin for error if people are using it to decide whether or not to evacuate.
It is a massive margin. A 33% chance of the center tracking outside the boundary is hugely significant. But even more critical than the track of the center is the fact that the cone tells you absolutely nothing about the actual impacts.
Right, because a hurricane isn't just a dot on a map.
Exactly. It's a massive, sprawling atmospheric heat engine. It can stretch for hundreds of miles. The graphical cone does not show you how far the hurricane force wind field extends. It doesn't show you where the devastating storm surge will hit. And it certainly doesn't map out the radius of the torrential flooding rainfall.
So if I'm looking at a forecast map and my city is sitting, say, 50 miles outside the edge of the cone, my optimism bias tells me, great, the storm is missing me.
Yep, you think you're safe.
But in reality, the right front quadrant of that storm, which is historically the most dangerous, moisture-loaded, and wind-heavy sector, could be sweeping directly over my house.
Exactly. The impacts are felt hundreds of miles away from that skinny black line in the middle of the cone. If you wait to see if your house is inside the cone before you act, you are using the wrong tool for the job.
All right, so if the cone is a terrible trigger for action, what about the official alerts? Because NOAA and the National Weather Service issue hurricane watches 48 hours before tropical storm force winds arrive and hurricane warnings 36 hours out. If those are the official alarms, why shouldn't I just use the warning as my cue to start preparing?
Well, because human nature craves a definitive, authoritative signal. We want someone in a uniform to tell us, now is the time. But as the disaster management protocols in your sources make explicitly clear, when a hurricane warning is issued, you should not be starting your preparations.
What should you be doing?
A warning means time is up. Let's really analyze what 36 to 48 hours looks like in the real world.
I mean, it's a day and a half.
Right. And in that 36 hours, you are expected to execute a massive logistical operation. You have to secure the exterior of your home, physically haul and attach heavy storm shutters, navigate incredibly congested grocery aisles to gather a week's worth of highly specific supplies.
Fuel your vehicles, secure your pets, pack your vital documents.
Yes, and potentially navigate gridlocked evacuation routes. All while maintaining your normal biological needs like sleeping, and likely while managing the stress of your children or elderly relatives.
I have to admit, when you list it all out like that, 36 hours sounds, well, it sounds impossible. Even just getting out of a major coastal city can take 15 hours if contraflow hasn't been properly initiated on the interstates.
And if every gas station is tapped out, the time just evaporates. When a hurricane warning is issued, it means severe, life-threatening conditions are imminent. By the time the warning hits your phone, the hardware store is empty, the plywood is gone, the batteries are gone.
So your options are gone.
In a disaster scenario, your options dictate your survival. If you wait until 36 hours out, your options have been entirely eliminated. You're left entirely at the mercy of whatever you happen to have lying around the house.
Which perfectly illustrates why the preparation has to happen now. Even if we're entering a La Niña or El Niño pattern, the baseline readiness needs to be the same. And this transitions us to the first massive decision you need to make long before a storm forms, a concept your sources refer to as know your zone versus know your home.
This is huge.
Because if you wait until the last minute, you might make the wrong choice about whether to stay or whether to flee. Let's start with the zones. I see people get this confused all the time.
It is a critical distinction, and mixing them up can be a fatal mistake. There is a profound difference between an evacuation zone and a flood zone.
They sound like the same thing to a lot of people.
I know, but they are entirely different maps, managed by different agencies for entirely different purposes.
I can completely understand the confusion, though. If someone pulls up the FEMA map online and sees that their house is located in flood zone X, which is designated as an area of minimal flood hazard, it's completely logical for them to think, well, I'm not in a flood zone, so I don't need to evacuate. Why is that logic flawed?
Because FEMA flood zones are primarily financial tools.
Financial tools?
Yes. They are designed for the National Flood Insurance Program to calculate your insurance premiums based on the statistical probability of inland, riverine, or rainfall-driven flooding over a long period of time, like the 100-year floodplain. Evacuation zones, on the other hand, are designated by local and state emergency management agencies.
Okay, so how are those different?
They are usually lettered, like Zone A, Zone B, all the way through Zone F. And these evacuation zones are almost exclusively based on the threat of storm surge.
Okay. Let's break down storm surge mechanically for a moment because it's not just a big wave, right?
Not at all. Storm surge is a massive dome of ocean water that is physically pushed onto the land by the sheer force of the hurricane's winds.
So the wind is literally plowing the water.
Yes, as the storm churns over the ocean, the cyclonic winds act like a plow, scraping the surface of the water and piling it up. Furthermore, the extremely low barometric pressure in the eye of the storm acts like a giant vacuum, literally lifting the surface of the ocean upward. When that massive, heavy dome of water hits the shallow continental shelf near the coastline, it has nowhere to go but up and inland.
So an evacuation zone map is basically showing you the physical areas that will be entirely submerged under the ocean when that surge comes ashore.
Precisely. Zone A represents the lowest lying coastal areas, the barrier islands, and properties directly on the water. They're always evacuated first because they are the most vulnerable to this moving wall of ocean.
Makes sense.
The key takeaway from your research here is that local officials issue mandatory evacuation orders to save you from drowning in the surge, not to save you from the wind.
That perfectly aligns with the oldest adage in meteorology. Hide from the wind, run from the water. The physics of water are just unforgiving. You can over-engineer a house with concrete and steel to withstand a Category 5 wind gust of 160 miles per hour, but you absolutely cannot engineer a standard residential home to withstand a 15-foot wall of moving ocean water.
No, the lateral force is too immense.
Right. A single cubic yard of seawater weighs roughly 1,700 pounds. When that hits a brick wall, it crushes the foundation, scours the sand out from underneath the footings, and simply washes the house away.
It's terrifying. But the water threat doesn't stop at the coastline. The data in your sources regarding inland freshwater flooding is incredibly sobering.
What do the numbers look like?
When we analyze the fatalities caused by tropical cyclones in the United States over the last decade, specifically between 2013 and 2022, the numbers completely shatter the public's perception of what makes a hurricane deadly. Nearly 57% of all direct fatalities during that period were caused by freshwater flooding from heavy rainfall.
More than half. That means the rain is killing more people than the wind and the coastal surge combined. I think people have a massive blind spot here.
They absolutely do.
A hurricane makes landfall, the massive winds die down, the storm is downgraded to a tropical depression on the news, and everyone miles inland thinks the danger has passed.
And that is exactly when the freshwater flooding danger peaks. As the storm moves inland, it loses its connection to the warm ocean waters that fuel its wind speeds, but it retains an absolutely massive payload of tropical moisture.
So it just dumps all that water.
Yes. If the upper-level steering currents collapse, that tropical depression can park itself over an inland region for days, wringing out 30, 40, or even 50 inches of rain over a single watershed. It overwhelms rivers, overtops dams, and inundates neighborhoods that are hundreds of miles from the coast.
So evaluating your risk requires a dual approach. You have to look at the local evacuation map for the coastal surge, and you have to look at your topographical elevation for the inland rain.
Exactly right.
Now let's say I've done this analysis. My house is far inland, I'm high above the floodplain, and the local authorities have not issued an evacuation order for my area. I've decided to shelter in place. This brings us to the know your home portion of the strategy.
Time to look at the structure.
Yeah, how do I physically assess if my home is strong enough to hide from the wind?
Assessing your home's structural integrity primarily comes down to understanding when it was built and the building codes that were enforced at that time. Following the catastrophic devastation of Hurricane Andrew in 1992, many hurricane-prone states, notably Florida, completely overhauled their building codes.
I remember that shift. It was massive.
It was. Generally speaking, homes built after 2002 are subject to much stricter, heavily engineered standards.
We're talking about specific mechanical connections, right? It isn't just about using thicker wood.
Correct. Modern codes require what engineers call a continuous load path. This means the roof is mechanically tied to the walls using galvanized steel hurricane straps, and the walls are mechanically bolted directly into the concrete foundation.
So the whole house is strapped together.
Exactly. Instead of relying on gravity and a few nails to hold the house together, the entire structure is tied together as one unified, rigid box. If you live in a post-2002 site-built concrete block home that is safely outside of the water zones, sheltering in place is usually the safest option. It keeps you off the highways and prevents you from getting trapped in gridlocked traffic during a torrential downpour.
But there is a massive, non-negotiable exception to this rule in the disaster management protocols you provided. If you live in a mobile home, a manufactured home, an RV, or one of those trendy tiny homes, everything we just said about sheltering in place just goes out the window.
Oh, absolutely. If you reside in one of those structures, you must evacuate. It does not matter if you are hundreds of miles inland or completely safe from flooding, you have to leave.
But I've heard people argue against this. They'll say, my modern mobile home has heavy-duty steel hurricane tie-downs anchoring it deep into the ground. It isn't going anywhere. Why is that a false sense of security?
Because it demonstrates a total misunderstanding of how wind forces interact with the structure. The steel tie-downs are designed to hold the heavy steel chassis to the ground, and they usually do a good job of that. But the aerodynamic profile of a mobile home, essentially a large, flat-sided rectangle, is highly susceptible to wind resistance and uplift.
So the weak point isn't the ground connection.
No, the weak point is the connection between the walls and the chassis, and the roof to the walls. The structural materials and the framing techniques simply cannot withstand sustained, severe hurricane-force winds. The tie-downs might hold the floor in place, while the sheer force of the wind tears the superstructure, the walls, and the roof completely apart, exposing the occupants to flying debris.
That's horrifying.
The unified guidance from emergency managers is unwavering. Mobile home residents must evacuate to a sturdier structure, period.
And if you are evacuating, whether you're leaving a mobile home or fleeing a coastal surge zone, your sources highlight a critical logistical point that almost everyone misses. You need to know multiple physical evacuation routes. You cannot just rely on your smartphone's GPS on the morning of the storm.
Relying solely on digital navigation during a massive weather event is incredibly reckless. When heavy freshwater flooding begins, it can quickly wash out low-lying roads or submerge crucial bridge access points long before the worst of the wind even arrives.
And your GPS doesn't always know that.
No. If your primary route to the interstate is suddenly a river, and you don't intimately know the secondary back roads that sit on higher elevation, you are physically trapped.
Let me guess. The GPS is just going to keep trying to route me right back to the flooded highway.
Exactly. The routing algorithms are designed for traffic efficiency, not disaster survival. Furthermore, as millions of people attempt to evacuate simultaneously, the cellular towers become intensely congested. Data networks slow to a crawl or fail entirely.
Right. Your navigation app might lose its connection just when you reach a detour.
Which is why having a physical, laminated paper map of your region in the glove box of your vehicle is a non-negotiable part of your kit.
Okay, so let's shift scenarios. You've evaluated the maps. Your home is a solid concrete block structure built in 2010. You're high and dry on a hill, and you make the calculated decision to shelter in place. Now we have to talk about what actually needs to be inside that concrete fortress to ensure you can survive the aftermath. Let's dig into the forgotten supply kit.
This is where people really drop the ball. For decades, the standard public service announcement advised families to build a 3-day disaster supply kit. But modern emergency management theory, reflected in the research you provided, is drastically shifting that baseline guidance.
3 days just isn't enough anymore.
A 3-day kit is simply insufficient in the modern era, primarily because of our deep reliance on fragile infrastructure. When a major hurricane makes landfall, the power grid doesn't just flicker. Massive transmission towers are crumpled, substations are flooded. It takes specialized crews weeks to clear the massive debris fields before they can even begin restringing the power lines.
So you're on your own.
Yes. Therefore, you need to be building a 7-day supply kit.
7 days. That's a full week without outside assistance. I know FEMA technically recommends up to 5 days, but state agencies are increasingly pushing for 7. That means 7 days of non-perishable food and, critically, a 7-day supply of all life-sustaining medications.
Medications are so easy to forget.
But let's talk about the water, because the logistics of storing water are staggering.
The universal rule of thumb is an absolute minimum of 1 gallon of water per person per day. And it is vital to understand that this isn't just for drinking.
What else is it for?
That gallon has to cover basic hydration, food preparation, and basic hygiene and sanitation.
Let's do the math on that. If you have a family of 4 and you need a 7-day supply, you are looking at storing 28 gallons of water. That takes up a massive amount of physical space in a pantry or a garage.
It really does.
You simply cannot buy 28 gallons of water at the grocery store 36 hours before landfall. They won't have it, and even if they did, you couldn't fit it in your cart. You have to acquire it gradually, weeks in advance.
Absolutely.
But water and canned soup are the obvious items. Let's look at the inventory list you provided. What are the things people invariably forget until it's too late? I know we both have our own personal kits, but what does the research highlight?
The single most frustrating, consistently forgotten item is a high-quality manual can opener.
Oh, yes.
It sounds absurdly basic, but the psychological oversight is real. People will diligently purchase 50 cans of beans, vegetables, and ravioli. The storm hits, the power grid fails, they walk into the kitchen, and they realize their sleek, under-cabinet electric can opener is entirely useless.
It's just a paperweight.
Exactly. They're surrounded by food, but have no safe way to open the steel cans. You need a sturdy, rust-proof manual can opener, and you need to actually know where it is located.
I can vividly imagine someone trying to smash a can of soup open with a hammer in the dark. It's dangerous and completely avoidable.
Totally avoidable.
Here's another overlooked item from the sources: spare eyeglasses. If the wind blows a window in, or you are forced to evacuate your flooded living room in the pitch black of night, and you lose or shatter your primary pair of glasses, your ability to navigate the hazards of a disaster zone is instantly and severely compromised. You become a liability to yourself.
It's such a small thing, but so critical. And another massive vulnerability in our modern preparedness is our reliance on the digital economy. We are a nearly cashless society.
I use my phone to pay for everything.
Right. We tap our phones or swipe plastic for groceries, gas, everything. But it is crucial to understand how point-of-sale systems actually operate. Credit card terminals and ATMs require 2 things to function: electricity and an active internet connection, usually relying on cellular backhaul.
And when the storm hits...
When the power grid fails, the cellular towers quickly burn through their backup generators and go dark. The digital economy halts instantly.
So if your neighborhood grocery store miraculously sustains no damage and decides to open its doors the day after the storm to sell supplies by lantern light, They cannot process your credit card.
They cannot. You must have physical cash, and specifically, you need a large reserve of small denominations, ones, fives, tens, and 20s.
Mm.
If you hand a cashier a $100 bill for a $10 bag of ice, they are not going to have the ability to make change for you.
So cash really is king.
Cash is the absolute king in the immediate aftermath of a disaster.
That ties directly into another digital vulnerability: printed emergency contacts. We have entirely offloaded our memories to our smartphones. I couldn't tell you my own brother's phone number if my life depended on it.
Very few people can these days.
Right. If your phone dies or gets waterlogged and you manage to hike 2 miles to a relief station that has a working satellite phone, do you actually know the numbers you need to call? Do you know your insurance agent's direct line, your out-of-state family members? You must have these numbers physically written down on a piece of paper, stored inside a waterproof zip-top bag.
And speaking of phones dying, the way people plan for backup lighting is fundamentally flawed. Relying on your smartphone's built-in flashlight as your primary light source is a terrible strategic error.
Oh, because it kills the battery.
It drains your battery at a highly accelerated rate. In a disaster, your smartphone battery is your lifeline. It is your only way to receive emergency broadcasts from local authorities, communicate your safety to your family, and eventually begin the torturous process of contacting your insurance company.
So what should people use instead?
You need dedicated, battery-powered lighting, LED headlamps so your hands remain free to move debris, and wide beam lanterns to safely illuminate a room. You just can't rely on the phone.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the most vulnerable members of our household, because their needs dictate a massive portion of the logistical planning. Let's start with pets. It's absolutely heart-wrenching every time a major storm passes, and the news helicopters show footage of dogs stranded on rooftops or cats clinging to floating debris.
It is a profound tragedy, and largely preventable. The data from animal welfare organizations included in your research stack estimates that roughly 1/3 of all pet owners do not have a concrete disaster plan for their animal.
1/3! That's huge!
It is. What happens is that people wait until the last minute, panic sets in, and when they're forced to evacuate quickly, they make the devastating choice to leave the animal behind, falsely assuming they'll be back in a day or two. If your plan involves going to a public evacuation shelter, you must understand the rules of entry. Not all public shelters legally allow pets, primarily due to sanitation and allergy concerns.
So you have to identify a designated pet-friendly shelter long before the season starts. But let's say I find one. I can't just stroll through the front doors of a high school gymnasium with my golden retriever on a leash, can I?
Absolutely not. Pet-friendly shelters operate under strict municipal guidelines. They require verifiable proof of ownership and up-to-date vaccination records, specifically for rabies, to prevent outbreaks in closely confined spaces.
That makes sense.
A critical pro tip from disaster managers is to take a printed, physical photograph of yourself standing with your pet and keep it in your waterproof document bag. If the chaos of the storm causes you to get separated from your animal, that photograph is your definitive proof of ownership to rescue agencies.
I love that tip. I never would have thought of that.
You also need to stockpile a 7-day supply of their specific dry or canned food, extra water strictly allocated for them, a sturdy crate or carrier to keep them contained and calm in an unfamiliar environment, and an extra leash.
We also need to think about the kids. A hurricane is an incredibly traumatic sensory overloading event for a child. The barometric pressure drops, the wind outside sounds like a freight train, the house is plunged into darkness, and they can sense the intense stress radiating from their parents.
It's terrifying for them.
You can't just hand them a tablet because the battery will die and the Wi-Fi is down. You need to pack psychological comfort items, their favorite blankets, specific stuffed animals, and critically, games and activities that operate on zero electricity. Board games, coloring books, intricate puzzles. You have to keep their minds actively engaged and distracted from the terrifying reality outside the walls.
Beyond pets and children, your sources heavily emphasize the critical importance of the Special Needs Registry. This is perhaps one of the most vital services offered by local emergency management agencies, but it completely relies on proactive registration.
Who qualifies for that registry?
If you, or someone living in your home, relies on continuous electricity to operate life-sustaining medical equipment, such as a ventilator, an oxygen concentrator, or a dialysis machine, you are incredibly vulnerable to grid failure.
Or if someone has a severe mobility issue and requires specialized transportation, like a wheelchair-accessible van, to safely evacuate.
Exactly. You absolutely cannot wait until the hurricane warning is vibrating on your phone to call the county and ask for specialized help. The emergency call centers will be overwhelmed. You must register with your local special needs registry months before a storm ever threatens.
Because they use those lists to plan, right?
Emergency managers use these highly detailed lists to proactively allocate specialized resources, secure backup generators for specific medical shelters, and dispatch targeted transportation ahead of the storm. But they cannot allocate a resource to you if they do not know you exist.
All right, so we've meticulously planned out our 7-day internal supply chain. We've secured the calories, the water, the lighting, the paperwork, and the pets. The people inside the fortress are ready.
Safe and sound.
But what about the structural integrity of the fortress itself? Let's transition to the physics of hardening the shell of your home and defeating the sheer mechanical force of the wind. Where does a homeowner even begin this assessment?
When analyzing residential structural resilience, engineers always start at the top. The roof is your home's absolute first line of defense. If the roof system fails, it initiates a rapid, cascading, and catastrophic total loss of the property.
Because of the water.
Right. Once the roofing material is compromised, massive amounts of water intrude into the attic space. This water destroys the insulation, which then collapses the drywall ceilings, saturating the flooring, and completely ruining your personal belongings and electrical systems. In fact, deep analyses of insurance claims data reveal that up to 90% of all hurricane-related property claims involve some degree of roof damage.
90%. That statistic alone should make every homeowner look up at their ceiling right now. It is the single most vulnerable point of failure.
It is. And this is exactly why the engineering research you provided strongly advocates for upgrading to a fortified roof standard. The FORTIFIED program was developed by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety based on decades of literal wind tunnel testing. It fundamentally changes how the roof is attached to the house.
How so?
A standard roof relies on smooth nails to hold the plywood decking to the trusses. The FORTIFIED standard requires the use of ring shank nails.
Let me break down why that matters mechanically. A smooth nail can easily be pulled straight up and out of the wood by the aerodynamic uplift forces generated by high winds. A ring shank nail has threaded grooves all the way down its shaft.
Kind of like a screw.
Yes. When it is driven into the wood fibers physically expand and lock into those grooves, effectively turning the nail into a screw. It drastically increases the upward force required to rip the plywood off the roof.
Precisely. It secures the deck. But the most critical component of the FORTIFIED standard is the installation of a sealed roof deck or a secondary water barrier. A thick, specialized waterproof tape is applied over every single seam where the plywood panels meet.
That's brilliant.
It means that even if a Category 4 wind comes along and violently tears all of your shingles or metal panels completely off the roof, exposing the wood underneath, the secondary barrier remains completely intact. A torrential rain hits the taped wood and rolls off into the gutters instead of pouring directly through the seams and into your attic. It prevents the cascading water damage that ruins the interior.
I want to revisit the analogy I used at the very beginning of our conversation, the balloon analogy, because it perfectly explains exactly why protecting the roof and the openings of your house is a matter of physics, not just preventing a wet rug. Let's expand on the mechanics of it.
It's a great visualization.
When a hurricane slams into your home, you have an incredible amount of positive wind pressure pushing against the exterior walls on the windward side. As long as the house remains sealed, it can generally deflect this pressure. But the moment an opening is breached, like a window shattering from a flying tree branch, that high-velocity air forcefully injects itself into the interior of the home.
It immediately alters the internal atmospheric pressure of the structure.
Exactly. The wind rushes in and the pressure inside the living room spikes dramatically. It is literally like blowing pressurized air from a compressor into a rubber balloon. But your house isn't flexible, it is rigid. As that immense internal pressure pushes upward against the ceiling, trying to find an escape route, the external wind blowing over the top of the roof is simultaneously creating aerodynamic lift, much like air moving over an airplane wing.
So you're getting hit from both sides.
You have extreme pressure pushing up from the inside and extreme suction pulling up from the outside. Pop. The weakest point gives way, which is almost always the connection between the trusses and the walls. The roof lifts completely off. Without the weight and structural tie of the roof holding them in place, the exterior walls simply collapse outward. A single broken window can trigger the total structural annihilation of the building.
That is exactly how engineers view the threat. Defending the envelope of the home, preventing that sudden internal pressurization, is the entire point of home hardening. And when we look at the envelope, the largest, most structurally weak opening on almost any suburban home is the garage door.
No, standard garage doors are incredibly flimsy. You can physically push on them with your hand and feel them
Ah.
flex.
They are essentially thin sheets of aluminum on lightweight tracks. When hurricane-force winds hit a standard non-reinforced garage door, the metal simply buckles and folds inward. The tracks warp and snap. Once the garage door fails, you have an absolutely massive, two-car-wide gaping hole, allowing pressurized wind directly into the structure.
And there goes the roof.
The wind rushes into the garage, pushes violently up on the ceiling, and tears the roof structure directly over the garage, completely apart. The mitigation strategy here is straightforward. You can completely replace the door with a heavily reinforced, wind-rated, impact-resistant garage door, or, as a more budget-friendly alternative, you can install aftermarket steel bracing kits.
What do those kits do?
These kits consist of heavy steel posts that anchor into the concrete floor and the header above, physically reinforcing the door at its weakest midpoint so it cannot buckle inward.
Let's move from the garage to the windows, because your sources highlight an eternal, fiercely contested debate among homeowners in hurricane-prone regions. Should you invest in hurricane shutters, or should you spend the money on impact-resistant windows? Let's critically examine both.
They both achieve the exact same mechanical goal: preserving the envelope of the home to prevent internal pressurization. Let's start with impact-resistant windows, because the engineering behind them is remarkable. They are constructed using two panes of tempered glass with a highly durable, flexible layer of polyvinyl butyl or PVB sandwiched in between them. It is very similar to the laminated safety glass used in automobile windshields, but engineered to be significantly stronger.
The testing protocols for these windows are intense.
Right.
I've watched the engineering videos from the IDHS research facility. They literally load a specialized air cannon and fire a heavy 9-pound 2x4 piece of solid lumber directly at the center of the glass at 50 feet per second. That is roughly 34 miles per hour.
And when that piece of lumber impacts the window, the outer layers of the tempered glass will shatter. It spiderwebs completely across the pane. But the inner, highly flexible laminate layer absorbs the kinetic energy and stretches, physically holding all the broken shards of glass together in the frame. The 2x4 bounces off. The wind and the driving rain cannot breach the envelope of the home. The absolute greatest advantage of impact windows is their passive nature. They're always active, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Why is that passive nature so critical?
Because storms can intensify incredibly rapidly. If a weak tropical storm suddenly explodes into a Category 4 hurricane overnight while you're sleeping, or if you happen to be traveling out of state on vacation when a storm unexpectedly shifts its track toward your city, your home is already fully protected. You do not have to race through chaotic traffic, climb a dangerous ladder in the pouring rain, and spend 6 exhausting hours wrestling with heavy steel panels to protect your home.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because we have to talk about the financial reality of this research. Impact windows are astronomically expensive. Retrofitting an entire average-sized suburban home with high-quality impact windows can easily cost upwards of $30,000 to $40,000. That is simply not a realistic budget for a massive portion of the population.
Your pushback is entirely valid and is the primary reason why traditional hurricane shutters remain the most popular, cost-effective, and highly reliable form of protection. If impact glass is out of reach, permanent shutter systems, like aluminum accordion shutters that slide on heavy tracks, or Bahama shutters that prop open for shade and lock down for storms, are excellent investments. They require manual deployment, but it only takes a few minutes per window. If even those are too costly, the traditional method of utilizing corrugated steel or aluminum panels is perfectly fine, provided you have permanently installed the heavy-duty mounting hardware around your windows well in advance of this season.
And what if someone is listening to this right now? A storm is 3 days away. They have absolutely zero budget for impact glass or steel panels, and they are desperate for mitigation tactics that actually work. What can they do?
There are several highly effective, virtually free mitigation tasks you can execute. First, walk the entire perimeter of your home with a $10 tube of exterior silicone caulk. Seal every single microscopic gap and crack around your window frames, door frames, and pipe penetrations. Wind-driven rain will exploit the tiniest opening and push water into your drywall. Second, aggressively prune your landscaping. Cut away any dead, diseased, or overhanging tree branches near your roof. In a hurricane, those branches cease to be wood. They become lethal, high-velocity projectiles. Finally, physically clean your gutters and downspouts. If your gutters are choked with decaying leaves and debris, the sheer volume of torrential rainfall will simply back up, overflow to gutters, and either pour straight down into your foundation, causing structural settling, or back up onto your roof eaves and into your attic.
I'll add one of my absolute favorite zero-cost last-minute mitigation tricks for anyone who has a swimming pool in their backyard. If you have heavy metal or dense plastic patio furniture, do not leave it on the deck, and do not try to cram it all into your living room. Take that heavy furniture and sink it directly into the water at the bottom of your pool.
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive to people who have never heard of it, but the physics work perfectly.
They absolutely do. The mass of the water completely insulates the furniture from the violent aerodynamic forces of the wind. It securely anchors those heavy metal chairs so they do not become spinning, flying missiles that smash through your neighbor's unprotected windows. Just remember to remove any fabric cushions or pillows before you sink them, or your pool's filtration system will be completely destroyed by the deteriorating fabric.
While we are addressing last-minute actions, your sources demand that we definitively kill one of the most pervasive, dangerous myths in hurricane preparedness.
Let me guess, taping the windows.
Yes. Taking a roll of masking tape or duct tape and placing a giant X over your glass panes, it is a complete 100% myth.
Not only is it a myth, but as a meteorologist, I have to emphasize that it is actively physically dangerous to you and your family. Let me explain the mechanics of why. People think the tape will strengthen the glass against the wind pressure. It provides absolutely zero structural reinforcement. A 120-mile-per-hour wind gust does not care about a piece of masking tape. If a heavy piece of debris strikes an untaped window, the glass will typically shatter into hundreds of small, relatively lightweight, and slightly less lethal pieces. But if you have taped that window, the strong adhesive holds the broken glass together. Instead of small pieces, the impact creates giant, jagged, incredibly heavy shards of glass held together by the tape. When the wind blows those massive shards into your living room, they act like flying guillotines. They can cause catastrophic, lethal injuries. Do not tape your windows. It is a waste of time. It ruins your glass with baked-on adhesive, and it puts your family in mortal danger.
Let's move the timeline forward. We've executed all the home hardening, your roof stayed attached, your impact windows deflected the debris, and the storm has finally passed. The wind dies down, the sun comes out. You might look outside and think you survived. But the emergency is far from over. The next immediate grinding crisis is the complete collapse of the electrical infrastructure. We need to discuss the power dynamics of post-hurricane survival.
And this is where the reality of the aftermath becomes incredibly grueling, physically and psychologically. When a Category 4 storm ravages a region, the utility companies are not coming to fix the transformer on your street corner the next day. They have to triage the entire grid. They prioritize hospitals, water treatment plants, and emergency command centers first. Residential neighborhoods are at the absolute bottom of the repair list. You could be facing 2, 3, or even 4 weeks without power in the sweltering 95-degree heat with 100% humidity. This harsh reality has sparked a massive shift in how homeowners approach their energy needs, which is heavily detailed in your technology research.
The shift is profound. Homeowners are increasingly refusing to rely solely on the highly vulnerable, centralized utility grid. Instead, they are investing massive amounts of capital into decentralized, personal power generation and storage technology.
Historically, that meant purchasing a permanent, gas-powered standby generator.
Correct. The traditional approach is the permanent standby generator from major manufacturers. These are large, heavy steel units installed permanently on a concrete pad outside your home. They're directly plumbed into your home's underground natural gas line or a massive liquid propane tank. They are incredibly reliable. When the central grid completely drops, a sophisticated piece of hardware called an automatic transfer switch detects the voltage loss and instantly fires up the generator engine. Within roughly 10 seconds, your house is fully powered. It can run your central air conditioning, keep your refrigerators freezing, and power all necessary medical devices without you ever having to step outside or pull a starter cord.
But the technology landscape you provided in your sources shows a rapid, aggressive shift away from internal combustion engines and toward advanced battery chemistry. Let's deep dive into whole home battery systems because the capabilities are fundamentally changing the mitigation strategy.
The rise of whole home battery storage, typically utilizing advanced lithium iron phosphate chemistry, is revolutionary. These massive battery banks are installed permanently on the walls of your garage. Like a standby generator, they utilize an automatic transfer switch, but they operate with absolutely zero noise, zero vibration, and zero local carbon emissions. The sheer instantaneous power delivery of modern inverters allows these systems to easily support heavy 240-volt appliances, meaning they possess the surge capacity to start the heavy compressor of a central air conditioner or the heavy motor of a deep well water pump.
And when you pair those heavy-duty battery banks with a rooftop solar array, you unlock a completely different level of resilience.
It creates a microgrid. If your system is engineered with an islanding capability, meaning it can safely disconnect from the dead utility grid and operate independently, you can theoretically operate off the grid indefinitely. During the scorching daylight hours, the solar panels power the home's consumption while simultaneously directing excess energy to recharge the depleted battery banks. When the sun sets, the house seamlessly transitions to drawing power from the batteries. It completely eliminates the logistical nightmare of trying to source gasoline or propane when the local supply chain is collapsed.
Let me challenge this, though. Everything we just discussed, standby generators, whole home solar arrays, massive battery banks, assumes that the listener owns a single-family home with a yard, a roof, and a healthy budget. What about the millions of people who live in high-rise apartments or rented condominiums? They physically cannot install a permanent generator, and they are legally prohibited from running a loud, exhaust-spewing portable gas generator on a small wooden balcony. How do they adapt their power strategy?
Renters are historically the most vulnerable demographic during a prolonged power outage precisely because of these structural limitations. However, the portable energy storage market has exploded in recent years to fill this exact void. We are seeing widespread adoption of high-capacity portable power stations. These are essentially massive, highly advanced battery packs enclosed in durable casings.
So it's basically a gigantic version of the little battery you use to charge your phone at the airport.
Conceptually, yes, but exponentially more powerful. Because these units utilize battery chemistry rather than combustion, they produce zero toxic emissions and zero noise. They are perfectly safe to operate indoors, sitting right in the middle of a small apartment living room. A decently sized unit possesses enough continuous wattage to keep a full-size refrigerator running for several hours, preventing hundreds of dollars of food spoilage. It can easily power a CPAP machine overnight for those with sleep apnea, keep every communication device fully charged, and run high-velocity box fans to circulate the stagnant humid air and prevent heat stroke. They're an absolute lifeline for apartment dwellers.
Since we are discussing power generation, we have to issue the most critical, life-saving safety warning in the entire realm of meteorology and disaster recovery. It happens every single year, without fail, and it is entirely preventable.
The silent killer. Carbon monoxide poisoning.
Exactly. People survived the terrifying 140-mile-per-hour winds of the hurricane. Their house sustains zero structural damage. And 2 days later, the entire family is found dead in their beds because of how they chose to operate their portable gas generator. Let's explain the exact physiological mechanics of why carbon monoxide is so uniquely lethal.
The internal combustion engine of a portable gas generator produces large volumes of carbon monoxide gas as a byproduct of burning fuel. Carbon monoxide is entirely odorless, completely colorless, and tasteless. Your human senses cannot detect it. When you inhale carbon monoxide, the chemical molecules bind to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells roughly 200 times more strongly than oxygen does.
So it essentially hijacks your blood.
It completely blocks the oxygen from attaching. Your lungs are breathing, but your vital organs, primarily your brain and your heart, are being suffocated from the inside out. This profound tissue hypoxia causes confusion, unconsciousness, and death, often while the victims are simply sleeping. This is why the operational rules for portable gas generators are absolute and non-negotiable.
Let me be as clear as possible. You must never operate a gas generator inside your home. You must never operate it inside your garage, even if the massive garage door is wide open. You must never operate it on a covered lanai or right outside a bedroom window. The invisible exhaust gas will slowly creep through the tiny cracks in the window frames or be sucked into the home's roof soffit vents. Portable generators must be operated outdoors, at a minimum of 20 feet away from the structure, with the exhaust pipe explicitly pointed away from any doors or windows.
Period. There are no exceptions to that rule.
Speaking of rules and learning from the past, let's look at the history in your sources. Because this year, 2026, marks the 100th anniversary of the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926.
Ah, yes. One of the most historically significant storms ever.
It really is. Back in the 1920s, Miami was going through this massive Florida land boom. People were pouring into the state, building right on the water, completely unaware of the risks.
They had no satellite imagery, no radar.
Exactly. So when this massive Category 4 storm hit, the devastation was just apocalyptic. The storm surge basically erased parts of Miami Beach. People actually went outside during the eye of the storm thinking it was over and were caught when the eye wall came back around.
It highlights the extreme limitations of forecasting back then, but also serves as a warning for modern residents. We have better technology now, but our complacency is just as dangerous as their lack of information was.
And we can't forget the October 1926 Cuba hurricane that happened just a month later.
Right, it's less well known today, but historically it remains incredibly important because of its unusual track and the massive loss of life.
Actually, as part of our ongoing historical deep dives, meteorologist Rob Jones is developing a dedicated 1926 Miami hurricane website that's planned for release during the 2026 hurricane season. It'll feature historical photographs, maps, firsthand accounts, and educational resources. Really fascinating stuff to look out for.
That sounds like an incredible resource.
Okay, let's move into the final phase of the disaster timeline outlined in your research. The storm has passed, you avoided the carbon monoxide, your battery system kept the fridge cold, and your family is physically unharmed. You might finally exhale and think you are entirely in the clear. But if your property sustained even minor physical damage, a few missing shingles, a cracked window, a flooded baseboard, the financial storm is just beginning. Let's talk about the dreaded paperwork disaster.
Financial preparedness is arguably the most neglected aspect of hurricane readiness, and it is the phase that causes the most prolonged, agonizing stress. Homeowners will spend countless hours measuring plywood and boarding up windows, but they refuse to spend 30 minutes documenting the financial assets they are actually trying to protect. Creating a comprehensive home inventory before the storm is the most critical step to surviving the labyrinthine insurance claims process.
I tell every single homeowner to execute this exact strategy. Pick a random sunny Tuesday in May, weeks before the season even begins. Walk through your entire house, holding your smartphone, recording a continuous video. Open every single closet door. Open the kitchen drawers to show the appliances. Pan the camera across your extensive electronics, your living room furniture, and all the expensive power tools sitting in your garage. Narrate the video out loud. Say what the items are roughly when you purchase them, and an estimate of what they cost.
That is an excellent baseline strategy. But I want to add a highly technical pro tip from the insurance adjuster's protocols in your sources that elevates this from a good idea to an irrefutable piece of evidence. Before you press record on that video, navigate into your smartphone's privacy settings and ensure that geotagging or location services are fully enabled for your camera application.
Why does the insurance company care about my phone's location settings?
Because following a widespread disaster, insurance adjusters are inundated with massive organized waves of fraudulent claims. People will claim they lost a $10,000 custom home theater system that they never actually owned. When you have geotagging enabled, the camera software embeds invisible metadata called EXIF data directly into the digital file of the video or photograph. This data utilizes satellite triangulation to pinpoint the exact GPS coordinates where the file was created. When you submit that video to the insurance company, the metadata provides mathematically verified proof that those specific high-value items were physically located inside your home at those exact coordinates before the storm struck. It eliminates the adjuster's doubt and drastically accelerates the payout of your claim.
That is a brilliant utilization of technology to protect yourself. Irrefutable, verifiable proof. But capturing the video is only half the battle. If you simply leave that massive video file sitting on your phone's local storage and your phone gets submerged in 3 feet of floodwater during the storm, your brilliant inventory is gone forever. You must immediately upload that file to a secure cloud storage service or email it to a trusted relative living in another state entirely. Your documentation must be as resilient as your roof.
And beyond the inventory, your sources emphasize that homeowners desperately need to understand the harsh realities of their actual insurance policies, because the vast majority of people have absolutely no idea what they are actually covered for until an adjuster is standing in their ruined living room denying their claim.
Oh, the painful, shocking realizations I have witnessed after a storm. The most common phrase I hear is, "What do you mean my deductible is different? My deductible is only $1,000. Let's explain how hurricane deductibles mathematically work, because it devastates people financially.
In many coastal, hurricane-prone states, insurance regulators allow companies to utilize a separate hurricane deductible or named storm deductible that is entirely distinct from your standard flat-fee homeowner's deductible. Instead of a flat $1,000 fee, a hurricane deductible is calculated as a straight percentage of your home's total insured dwelling value, typically ranging from 2% to 5% and sometimes higher for coastal properties.
Let's do the brutal math on that so it is perfectly clear. If your home is insured for a dwelling coverage value of $500,000 and your policy carries a 5% hurricane deductible, what does that mean when the roof blows off?
It means you are entirely responsible for the first $25,000 of damage out of your own pocket. The insurance company will not write you a single check until the total damage exceeds that $25,000 threshold. If the damage to your roof is assessed at $20,000, you pay for the entire repair yourself.
People are always utterly shocked by that math when they need the money the most. And we must continuously reiterate another brutal insurance reality. Standard homeowners insurance policies, the ones covering wind and fire, explicitly do not cover damage caused by rising water or flooding. If the storm surge inundates your living room, your standard policy covers nothing. Flood insurance is an entirely separate legal policy, typically underwritten by the federal government through the National Flood Insurance Program.
And the logistical trap with flood insurance is the mandatory waiting period. You cannot obsessively watch the National Hurricane Center cone, wait until the storm is 3 days away, and decide to purchase a flood policy. Federal law mandates a strict 30-day waiting period from the time of purchase before a new flood insurance policy officially takes effect. If you buy it today, you are not covered until next month.
Finally, let's talk about the displacement logistics. If a massive oak tree crushes your roof trusses, your house is legally uninhabitable. Where do you live while contractors spend 6 months rebuilding it?
This is where understanding additional living expense, or ALE coverage, within your policy is crucial. If your home is rendered uninhabitable by a covered peril, ALE coverage is designed to pay for your temporary housing, like a long-term hotel stay or a short-term apartment lease. It also covers the increased cost of restaurant meals since you cannot cook, and commercial laundry services. However, you must meticulously prove to the insurance company that you actually spent the money.
Which means saving every single physical and digital receipt in a dedicated folder. And to kickstart that entire process, you need to be the absolute first person to file a claim. Have your insurance agent's direct phone number saved in your phone and written down on that physical piece of paper in your waterproof bag. The line for available local contractors and insurance adjusters gets incredibly long, very fast. If you wait 3 days to call, you might wait 3 months for an inspection.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder based on all the materials we've analyzed today. We naturally view preparing for a hurricane as an intensely individualistic, solitary act. We board up our windows, we buy our water, we test our generator, we build our own personal fortress. But preparedness is actually a communal asset. When you take the time to properly secure your home, when you prune your dead trees, when you sink your patio furniture into the pool, you aren't just protecting your own property. You are actively preventing your lawn chairs and your fence panels from becoming the high-velocity flying debris that shatters your neighbor's window and structurally destroys their house. Your resilience directly impacts the survival of the people next door. Resilience is contagious. A neighborhood that prepares meticulously together recovers rapidly together.
That is a perfectly stated reminder of the interconnected reality of these massive weather events. We are all bound together by the weather. I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Make sure you take these insights, review your policies, build that 7-day kit, and assess your structural vulnerabilities long before the sky turns dark. And make sure to follow Rob Jones on Instagram at Meteorologist, TikTok at TV Meteorologist, YouTube at Rob Jones Hurricane, and Facebook at Hurricane Rob Jones for additional weather coverage, hurricane updates, and future deep dives. Please follow, share, comment, and rate the podcast. You've been listening to Meteorology Matters, created by meteorologist Rob Jones. Thanks for listening, and remember, meteorology always matters.